Our first speaker, our keynote speaker, is Kerry Anthony. And Kerry, I met the other night. When you come to Rome, you have a city of art and you have a city of food and culture. So I met Kerry for the first time in an Irish pub. Kerry is the Chief Executive of Depaul Ireland, a charity working with over 3,500 homeless people each year. Kerry has worked in the homelessness sector for 18 years across the United Kingdom and Ireland. And since began running Depaul Ireland, the charity has tripled in size. Kerry is a member of the Vincentian Families Systemic Change Commission and also sits on the commission of the FamVin Homelessness Alliance. Kerry, can I ask you to come and address us on this important topic?
Thank you, Graham. So, Father Vitali, who you heard earlier, came to visit Ireland for the first time around 10 years ago, and he came to a board meeting with Mark, and I was speaking at the board meeting, and he leant across to Mark and said, "What language is she speaking?" Because I have a tendency to speak very quickly, so I'm going to try to be slow, and because of that I will be reading from my notes, but I'm so pleased to be here today. I think this is such a wonderful conference and an opportunity to meet and learn from each other. The commitment of the Vincentian family around the globe to support our brothers and sisters experiencing homelessness is truly inspiring, and I hope each of you have felt inspired over the last few days. Just in terms of myself, I've been, as Graham said, working in the area of homelessness, it's actually for over 20 years now, in a range of cities and roles in the UK and Ireland. And I'm approaching today very much from a practitioner point of view. Slow down. Very much from a practitioner point of view, and won't be talking from an academic perspective. And I don't want to repeat what Louise has said, but with the Institute of Global Homelessness, we now have so much that we can reference in relation to academic literature around homelessness. In collaboration with the Vincentian family, I have some pictures here. You would notice some people. The Vincentian family, Depaul International, has grown and developed over the last 30 years as a service delivery organisation, now working in 7 countries addressing the issue of homelessness. And Depaul Ireland is a subsidiary of Depaul International. I've been able to see the benefit of being part of an organisation where learning can be shared with my colleagues in Depaul International. For me, I believe the formation of the FamVin Homeless Alliance provides us with an opportunity to do this on an even larger scale. And what I've been asked to do today is to talk a little bit about Depaul Ireland. So if you don't mind, I'll tell you the story of Depaul Ireland. And just in terms of understanding the context, I'll say a little bit about the context of homelessness in Ireland. So in the Republic of Ireland, there's in excess of 100,000 people on the housing waiting list. There's approaching 10,000 people in emergency accommodation and over 150 people sleeping rough in Dublin city centre each night. And in the context of other countries, this may seem modest, but 5 years ago there were 5,000 people in emergency accommodation. And so the number of people coming into different forms of homelessness has increased, as has the number of people on the housing waiting list. In recent years, we've seen an economic downturn, and this has been experienced heavily in Ireland and has led to people losing their homes due to the inability to pay mortgages and rent. And now Ireland has the fastest growing GDP in Europe, one of the fastest growing, and is experiencing an upturn in the economy. But unfortunately, this has led to people being completely priced out of the private rented market. A significant change in Ireland has been the number of families coming into homelessness. For as long as I've worked in homelessness, we've always worked with people with substance misuse issues, drugs and alcohol, and mental health issues, but the number of families in Ireland were very small, and this has changed. In addition, we've seen a significant increase in the number of migrants in our services, estimated to make up approximately 20% of the people in our emergency accommodation. In our emergency accommodation, we're also working with women who are heavily pregnant, children coming from the care system, people working during the day and coming back to emergency accommodation at night. So the environment in Ireland, for a country that has high levels of funding from the state to tackle homelessness, we aren't doing as well as we should. But that said, I firmly believe that if it was not for the intervention of Depaul over the years, the situation, particularly for the most hard to reach, would be worse. And I came to know Depaul about 16 years ago when I was managing a multidisciplinary team for the Health Board, the statutory agency, and this was for people who were street homeless or in emergency accommodation in the city in Dublin. At the time, if you were someone who was a chronic alcoholic or an active drug user, you were not likely to get accommodation in Dublin. And as a result, many people slept on the streets. In other words, people who needed us most were the least likely people to get the help. And that did not make any sense to me. I kept asking, why are we developing services that do not meet the needs of those who need us most? At this time, an organisation appeared in Dublin called Depaul, and they opened the first service for young people who were active drug users, and the first what we call wet service for people who had a long history of homelessness due to their alcohol misuse. In my then role, managing the multidisciplinary team, Depaul was a godsend. People who had not been able to access accommodation in the city were now indoors, had food, shelter, warmth, care and support. And I remember saying to my mother at the time, someday I will work for that organisation. What stood out to me then as a young professional, trying to find ways to support people, Depaul was an organisation that put its values into action. Like St Vincent de Paul and St Louise de Marillac, they sought to do the following: to reach those who needed them most and who others struggled to work with, to challenge the assumptions of the day, to be creative and innovative and find new ways to respond to need, to take risks, to work well with others, and to remain focused on ending homelessness and changing lives. 16 years on, Depaul is still doing this in Ireland, and I'm pleased to say that almost to the day, I've been working with Depaul for 13 of those years. And we collectively, and in partnership with the Vincentian family in Ireland, have supported thousands of people off the streets and out of homelessness. Over the 16 years, Depaul services have grown, and we now offer 28 services, providing accommodation for 600 people each day and supporting 300 people in the community. I want to focus today on some of the responses that we've made to street homelessness, with a focus on our work that is referred to as wet services. As I said earlier, Depaul came to Ireland to create a response to unmet needs. This is very hard, Yasmin. We've pioneered in Ireland what we refer to as low threshold and harm reduction services. These services are designed for people who've been on the streets for extended periods of time and for whatever reason cannot or do not want to stop using alcohol or drugs, and therefore they were continually excluded from other services, resulting in them becoming entrenched on the streets. Initially, we opened a night shelter for young people who were active drug users and a night shelter for those who were long-term street homeless with alcohol issues. At the time, these services were controversial, and people said it will never work. As there had been quite a number of deaths on the street, we were able to persuade the statutory agencies that we needed to give this a go. Over time, we have learned and expanded our practice in this area. And by low threshold, we mean that we will consciously maintain the entry and admittance requirements to services at a level that as few people as possible are denied access to that service. Every attempt will be made to build a mutually respectful relationship with those who use the service, both by staff and volunteers. And by harm reduction, we mean that we will aim to reduce the harmful or risky behaviour. This can relate to drug or alcohol-related harm, where users are either unwilling or unable to stop using. This also includes the reduction in health, social and other problems directly or indirectly related to drug and alcohol use or risky lifestyle choice. So we created a philosophy around what it was that we wanted to do, and at its core, we believed this to be a Vincentian philosophy. It was rooted in believing in the potential of people, accepting people where they were at, creating new responses to meet those who needed our support, and being pragmatic, and most importantly, holding hope alive for change. We've opened a number of these services now, taking people directly from the streets, and you can learn more on the Depaul Ireland website, and also there you can find a little booklet called Where You're At, and this talks more detail about how we work in this way. We have 3 wet services rooted in the philosophy of low threshold and harm reduction. And over time, we've developed our way of running these services. Initially, as I said, it was very pragmatic, just to get people off the street and provide a humane response to supporting them, acknowledging their dignity as a human being. But over time, this has developed to be a more professional approach, focused on harm reduction, but still maintaining the low-level admittance criteria, so people are actually able to get the help that they need. There are a number of important factors to highlight about these services. Firstly, it's only part of an overall service response to homelessness. Not every service should be wet or operate in this way. People are still allowed to drink on site. There's no prerequisite to have stopped drinking to get support. People have rights, but with this comes responsibility. Low threshold does not mean no threshold. Those using the services need to engage in an alcohol-managed programme. Yes, they can drink, but how much has to be agreed and monitored over the course of the day. We store and administer and record how much alcohol a person takes in a day. We also look at their medication intake, their food intake, and the behaviour to see how these all relate to each other. People are allocated a key worker, and they will walk alongside the clients and support them in making small, achievable steps to reduce harm and improve lifestyle. And we endeavour to keep rules and regulations to an absolute minimum. People working or volunteering in these services will adapt as much as they can a professional, non-judgmental approach, but they will be supportive and encouraging in techniques to build trust and support people who've disengaged to start to re-engage. Those who work or volunteer in our services are trained on how to do this, and they're provided with a toolkit to help support the progress the work. These services rely heavily on collaboration with other providers and health and social services professionals. They're not easy services, so they present many challenges, so challenging behaviour, issues to do with staff morale, medical non-compliance, the idea of harm reduction versus harm observation, access to further move on, public perception of this way of working, true partnership working, how do you meaningfully involve clients, and issues to do with mental health and substance misuse together. But what makes services like this work to get people off the streets? Crucially, the correct values and culture, and this needs to be fed right through the organisation. The commitment has to be there to engage those who need us most, and to do it in a way that enables people to make small steps towards change. There has to be a commitment to manage and deal with challenging behaviour and balance this with holding hope alive, as I said, for change. Those who come into these services need to feel safe and that they can be honest about their issues. Because we are not saying that you have to stop drinking, but rather that you should be honest about what you're drinking, how we can lower or change that, and people are more likely to stay and develop an honest relationship over time. Patience is required to ascertain and understand this fully. Training for staff and volunteers. These types of services, as I said, are not easy to work in. They can be incredibly challenging. So it's essential for us that we support our staff and volunteers. Time to debrief, training. We've had many deaths over the years in these services, and there's undoubtedly a connection between staff, volunteers and those who use the service. There is a community formed, and so support needs to be built around this. Policies and procedures and proper management procedures need to be in place. These are services that can be high risk. There are health and safety concerns, trips and falls, health-related issues to do with seizures, and much, much more. We've developed our working practices and are always happy to share this with others. Funding, and in Ireland, we are very different than many other people in this room. We do have a statutory commitment to addressing homelessness, and funding is available, and these services do require a high level of staff, and so a commitment to fund these services needs to be in place. I want to conclude today by saying that I do believe that homelessness can be ended when we think of creative ways to do it. Over the last 4 years, we've extended our low threshold and harm reduction working to provide housing first tenancies in Northern Ireland to this client group. We've provided over 200 placements for people in active addiction within the community, and they've achieved almost 80% success rate in maintaining their tenancies. We need to challenge ourselves not to assume that people will not succeed in leaving homelessness behind. We need to provide services and support frameworks that will enable this to happen. So many of the people that I've worked with over the years, others have assumed that they would not be able to leave the label of homelessness behind them, and I'm thrilled to say that they've been proved wrong. I firmly believe that homelessness should only ever be a point in time and should not define a person. Many times I've heard people say that certain individuals will never change, and you're just setting that person up to fail. I disagree, and the reason why I do is because I've seen it for myself. So, this is Jared on the left, on the right, meeting the Lord Mayor. So Jared lived in our Stella Maris project in Belfast. He'd been brought up in a family where the misuse of alcohol was commonplace. He started drinking at a very young age. He was homeless and on the streets of Belfast for a long time. Ger had been set on fire on the streets and suffered gravely from his injuries. As a result, he often set fires, and then he was labelled an arsonist, and therefore he was excluded from all services. He came to Depaul Stella Maris service, and the staff were told that he was unworkable with and that he would never survive there. It was not an easy journey for Ger. When he drank, his behaviour could be very challenging, but he did make some special connections with some staff. People started to see glimpses of his personality. They spent lots of time trying to engage him and divert him away from drinking. He loved pool, he loved playing snooker and fishing. They also worked with others to keep him in the service. Once, when he was arrested, they worked with the criminal justice system to make sure he was released on condition that he returned to Stella Maris and did not drink. Change doesn't always happen quickly, but one day Jared decided he was going to stop drinking completely, and he did. And he continued to stay in Stella Maris whilst others around him drank, and he stayed sober. He could be temperamental, but he was well loved by the team. He eventually moved into his own flat not far from the project and came back to visit regularly, to play pool and to have food. I was fortunate to visit him in his new home, which he was so proud of, and it was immaculate. He re-established contact with his daughters for the first time in 20 years and started to build a relationship with them again. One day we received a call to Stella Maris to say that Jared had died. He had died of pneumonia. The emergency services were alerted by his next-door neighbour. I was incredibly sad to hear of Jared's death, but for me, this was a wonderful success story. Ger, who had been considered unworkable with, destined to die on the streets and misunderstood, he died in his own home as a member of his community. It was his neighbour who had missed seeing him and had alerted the authorities, and I, among others from Depaul, attended his funeral with his daughters, who had re-established a relationship with their father before he had died. And for me, that is a wonderful, true success. Bridget, on the left. Bridget's lived with Depaul for 16 years, and the whole time Depaul have been in Dublin. And I truly believe that our staff and volunteers have helped Bridget to change her life. She had a very, very hard life. She came from a traveller background, and the travelling community in Ireland often experienced discrimination and exclusion. Bridget had experienced chronic domestic violence. She'd witnessed one of her children being killed in an accident. She lived on the streets for over 10 years, was in and out of emergency accommodation, and was never able to sustain a placement due to her alcohol addictions. She was one of the very first residents that moved into Depaul's Auntier Street project all those years ago. And this was an emergency wet service, the first of its kind in Ireland, which was supposed to be running for 6 months, but was there for much, much longer. Bridget was a big, big character and was well loved in Auntier Street. We knew many of those using this service were not going to be able to move elsewhere, and so we spent a long time advocating to get long-term accommodation with support for this client group. In 2008, we opened a purpose-built facility called Sundial House in Dublin, and this is long-term supported accommodation for people who've been street homeless and are still using alcohol. And as I said, it's an alcohol-managed programme, so people do engage in managing their alcohol, and there are health supports, nurses and carers on site. Bridget was one of our first residents in Sundial House, and on the day she moved in, she said it was like a palace. And I suppose from Bridget's perspective, after years of uncertainty, in and out of services, sleeping on the streets, it did look like a palace to her. Bridget, like the others who moved in to Sundial House, had very complex needs, years of exclusion, and generally speaking, people had the view that this service would never work. So I'm pleased to say that just a few weeks ago, I went to the project to celebrate 10 years of Sundial House. And I'm even more pleased to tell you that Bridget was there, interrupting my speech to tell the gathered group what a wonderful home Sundial has offered her. The manager who set the project up and knew Bridget well said that she felt for Bridget the tolerance that the staff showed to her drinking helped to get her indoors. But then the approach to support her to manage and reduce her drinking, that was critical in keeping her in the service and off the streets. The capacity of the staff to hold on to her when she had her bad days, and she had some very bad days, meant she wasn't excluded again, which was likely what she expected to happen to her. And this helped her to build trust and to consider Sundial House her home. In conclusion, to end street homelessness, no doubt, takes many things: policy, research, funding, buildings, services, and lots more. But it also needs vision, commitment, passion, strongly held values, and a belief that it can happen. We have not yet ended homelessness in Ireland, but by doing things differently, inspired by our values, we have helped to end homelessness for a lot of individuals, and that's what keeps me going. We in Depaul will continue to do so and to work with others to make sure our vision of ending homelessness and changing lives becomes a reality. Thank you.